think as many consumers of electronics may realise, the production of these kinds of devices is quite sophisticated. It involves supply chains that stretch across many different countries. Parts may move throughout these countries multiple times, and any kind of barriers to trade is a big problem for the tech sector. What we've seen in the course of this administration is really a unification of big tech with the authoritarian Trump administration. But there are points of disagreement, and this is one of them, that quite muscular stance by the US seeking to stretch its economic muscle and reach into various countries and force them to behave differently through the imposition of tariffs comes into conflict with a very powerful tech sector that wants free flow of trade in order to sell its consumer electronic items and provide services and the like. So we may be starting to see a conflict between the tech industry, which is very, very powerful, and of course the Trump administration, which has relied to at least some degree on the power of the tech industry in order to gain office and to consolidate its power since then.
Yeah, as you just flagged, we have heard from Donald Trump in the last couple of hours speaking on Air Force One. He said that there will be more announcements to come in this space, so we'll have to keep an eye on what happens there. But as you just mentioned there, the Trump campaign before he was elected was sort of backed quite significantly by the tech industry. What do you imagine is sort of going on behind closed doors here in relation to lobbying the administration in this sort of space?
Well, it's hard to draw to any other conclusion than that the tech sector is putting a lot of pressure on the Trump administration to revise its position on tariffs. Whether it succeeds will be another matter entirely. We've already seen some movement, but it's fair to say this administration is pretty chaotic. And I think that's a problem not just for people who make and manufacture consumer electronics, but also for investors in the industry. I think what it highlights for Australia as well is that the US is no longer a reliable partner when it comes to these kinds of questions. And if we are looking at a future forward economy, what the tech sector might look like for Australia, we're going to have to look at building up our own capability to protect our own sovereignty, to protect our own supply of consumer electronics, to also have a technology policy and a policy when it comes to innovation that isn't as dependent on the United States. And I think that would be good for Australia. It would also be good for human rights. It would be good on a range of different fronts. And that's, I think, the future that Australia is looking at.
One of the arguments from the Trump administration has, of course, been around bringing manufacturing to the US shores. Is it feasible, do you think, that, you know, an iPhone or a laptop can be made entirely in the US, and could we see that done in Australia as well?
Yeah, well, of course, I'm not an economist or a logistics expert, but I think it's preposterous to think that you could manufacture an iPhone within the United States sometime in the near future. This is a very sophisticated operation. It involves a lot of different movement of different parts across borders, but also a huge workforce that relies on robotics and all sorts of automation techniques that don't exist in the United States. I mean, I also think there's a real question around the quality of these kinds of jobs. The Trump administration, I think, is drawing on a kind of nostalgia for manufacturing jobs that might have existed in the mid-20th century, but no longer exist. A lot of people report how difficult it is to work in these factories manufacturing things like iPhones, and the conditions aren't great. So there's a real question around whether the policy really is realistic in a logistical sense, but also what political work it's doing in terms of shaping how we understand consumer electronics. The reality is, I think the United States is going to have to look elsewhere if it wants to return manufacturing jobs to the country. And I think the tech sector should lift its game in terms of how these electronics are produced so that they are better jobs for people who have to do them.